Hey, welcome, Finn's Faith, on this special impromptu kind of reaction video with myself and my co-host and co-pilot, as always, Jason Sarney. Welcome, Finn's Faithful. Dolphins are changing how they do business. Troy Aikman, Brandon Shore, a new GM search, and big implications for Mike McDaniel. What does it all mean? Let's talk about it. Jason, I guess the news surprised everyone when it came down yesterday. The Miami Dolphins bringing in former Hall of Fame quarterback, three-time Super Bowl champion with the Cowboys. He's currently on ESPN analyst on the Monday Night Football. Troy Aikman as a consultant to assist with their general manager role. Again, this is interesting. It's not a permanent role, but this is interesting news. Jason, your initial thoughts and reaction.
Well, I'm glad because I mentioned it on either our show or on Finn's TV a couple of weeks ago that Stephen Ross should bring in a consultant. He should bring in maybe multiple people to help analyze candidates and really sit in on interviews as Troy Aikman is going to do. Look, I get he's a former player. I get he doesn't have front office experience, but what he does have is relationships. He is a broadcaster who goes to meet with these teams and has meetings with coaches and management and players. So it's a relationship business. It's a connection business. So maybe at the very least, a candidate who may not maybe want to interview for a particular job, Troy Aikman could say, look, we want to interview you. So that can get somebody in the door. And then it's another voice to give to Stephen Ross. Because look, the last several years, internally, it hasn't been working. So if you want to go outside the building, and I know the Dolphins have done that in the last few decades once or twice, it hasn't necessarily worked. But look, you're bringing in a guy who has championship experience, who has the connections. Let's see what happens, and let's see what this process, how it unfolds.
Yeah, you bring up a bunch of great points I agree with. I've always said, I told you, who does Stephen trust? The biggest problem, the big decision he's had to make, the one decision he's had to make in this organization is hiring the right guy. I said, who's in his ear? Who does he trust? And I've said Stephen Ross needs an outside opinion, someone he can trust with a fresh, unbiased opinion and perspective. Because clearly, Jason, the organization process has been flawed and unsuccessful for years. So the changes clearly need to be made, right? I'll give Ross credit for that. He's trying something different. Do I know if Aikman is the right person? No. But Ross's willingness here to bring in an outside consultant at least shows, the recognition that the current approach hasn't been working. It's been a process that's been flawed. You mentioned Aikman has spent decades in the NFL as a player, as a broadcaster, which he's got strong. You got to imagine he's got strong relationships with all 32 of these teams.
Right.
He's been around all these organizations. You said production meetings. He's asked the tough questions in those meetings. He will be heavily involved in this GM interview. Who he will have the seat at the table. So he knows what exactly probably to listen for and the questions to ask. I think the bigger question here too now is, what does it mean for Mike McDaniel? Okay, we remember that broadcast, Jason, where he kind of ripped into McDaniel in his coaching approach in the fourth quarter. What do you think this means for Mike? Is it lean you one way or another?
I'm still on the fence personally, and based on what the Miami beat writers and the local media, what they're saying, it seems that Ross still is leaning towards bringing Mike McDaniel back. Now, you could say what you want about Aikman's criticism during that Monday night Pittsburgh Steelers game. Yeah, he definitely was not thrilled with the play calling and the clock management. So this is going to be very interesting. And if you listen to McDaniel, it seems that there might be, he's preparing to come back, or maybe that's just he's masking his words or whatever. But I still think that even if a brand new GM is brought in and Mike isn't gone yet, I don't think that should be a reason that Mike is guaranteed his spot. If a new GM is brought in, I don't think you're going to get the top quality GM if it said, no matter what, here is your coach. So what's weird about this is that you have Brandon Shore also heading this search as well. They call it quarterbacking the search. Now, what's interesting with that is Shore is more of a accountant salary cap, financial guy, administrative guy, more than he is a football scout. So I don't know if that puts an X through some potential candidates who might be cut in that cloth. So it might be some sort of a match with the scouting prowess of certain candidates mixed with Shore, which to me is very rinse and repeat, and all due respect to Brandon Shore. I mean, if you look at what his progression was in the Dolphins organization, it's very human resources accounting based. You know what I mean? Like, so
salary cap.
So him looking for this search or leading the search is very, to me, HR. It's very much what his background was: director of human resources, senior director of human resources, senior director of football administration. So let's see what happens. But I am adamant with that there are probably 2 or 3 current assistant or deputy GMs, John Eric Sullivan, Alec Hallaby, who are going to become general managers, whether it's this cycle or next cycle. And if this is the cycle where a pair or more are going to take that next job, one of them is going to be a superstar, maybe 2 of them. And I don't think this is the year to pass that over. I think if there's a superstar out there, this is the time to get them. And gun to head, I don't know that Mike McDaniel is safe for 3, 4, 5 years as the coach of this team. So to bring him back at risk of not being able to hire a top-tier, next-in-line general manager, I think could be a potential miss. So I'd love to see what happens on Sunday. It could tell a lot if you go into a rough environment to New England. New England has a lot to play for. Yes, they're 13-3. They clinched the playoffs, but to get number 1, to get home field advantage, could punch a ticket to the Super Bowl or not. So they are playing for all the marbles, so to speak. So if the Dolphins go up in there, they're going to be banged up. You're probably going to be missing a couple players. Obviously, Darren Waller was just IR'd. Jordan Brooks is hurt, but he's going to give it a go. You got Chop Robinson in concussion protocol. Devon Achane is a game-time decision. So if McDaniel can go up there and end with a win and ruin a potential easy road to a division rival, that might literally clinch his spot in. If we're looking at another Steelers situation, if we're looking like another, shoot yourself in the foot, could win the game, but they blow it, that could seal his fate too. So I think that Sunday has a lot to do with what's going to happen. But the Troy Aikman thing is, to me, it's a win of a hire before anything happens. I think it was a good move to outsource, and he's a very intelligent football man. Let's just call it that.
Yeah, with a ton of experience, and to me, I think the point you made, Sunday shouldn't matter, right? Because what this means for McDaniel, I mean, that's the big question, right? He talked today. He made some comments. He didn't really say much, just saying that. Actually, I have I thought I had the comments that Mike did, but anyways, so for me, the big question, even though the report, to be clear, the reports do say Aikman's involvement is only in the GM position. It's nothing to do with McDaniel, which I find that hard to believe because ultimately that kind of goes hand in hand. Now, the decision to keep McDaniel is Ross's, and that's scary. But if they are very serious, and it seems like they're very serious about this GM position, they brought in outside help. They're going to hit the ground running on Monday, led by Brandon Shore. I'll talk about that in a second. But if Aikman's here to help truly use his connections and identify the top GM candidate, that person, if you hire one of the top guys, I've always said is likely going to want a clean slate. In today's NFL, new GM often wants their own head coach. So if you're forcing them, if you're doing it, bringing them in, my choice. Black Monday or even Sunday, you get rid of McDaniel, then you start this GM search, and then you have a much more advanced, much more likely opportunity to get guys to the table like the guys you like, Hallaby, because they already know, hey, I don't got to worry about this. I don't have to worry about the what if. I got to make the decision. Or maybe Ross is undecided still. How long is that going to last? So he'll know already that he's got a clean slate. So to me, we'll see how serious Ross is about this, depending on what he does with Mike. It makes no sense for me. I've always told you this, and I know you said bring him in, and we've had the argument before. Bring him in, Let the GM decide. To me, it makes no sense because most GMs are going to decide not to keep him. But I don't know. That's the question I don't know in the hiring process how they're going to do. We have to wait till Monday for that. So for me, it's even though this is a temporary advisory role, it makes me feel McDaniel's return a little less likely than before. Because it's clear to me Ross is serious about finding the right GM. That's what all these reports. The work has already been underway apparently, and two things I want to take out this. You mentioned Brandon Shore, right? This is significant. Brandon Shore being retained as kind of the Dolphins salary cap, financial point guy. Cam Wolf reported yesterday, great piece if you haven't watched it on NFL Network by Cam Wolf, that Shore will be, quote unquote, if I'm not mistaken, Jason, quarterbacking much of the GM search. I've heard for a long time, I think I've told you this privately, he was a name to keep an eye on, even when if a change is ever made. And now it seems he's taking a more prominent role. How you feel about that? That's, you said it's much more of the same. But it looks like Miami might adopt a structure where the general manager focuses primarily on the football operations while Shore handles the contract stuff, which is kind of the same, one on financial strategy, one on the football stuff. Similar, Jason, I want to tie this in, similar to the way the LA Rams operate, similar setup. It's worked well for them. There's a couple guys on the Rams I mentioned, and you said scouting background that changes some of the candidate list. It's going to be a heavy scouting background. But John McKay, used to that structure, and who's the potential head coach candidate? Does he bring around Chris Shula? I know many Dolphin fans are familiar with that. That's point number one. So you're talking to Brandon Shore, maybe tied in. Look, the Rams are used to that. They use that structure. Does that, and McKay, who has a scouting background, and Chris Shula, who Dolphin fans love, right? That if we tie that in together, he's used to that.
I mean, you got a guy who was promoted from, the scouting director who worked for Les Snead, one of the best in the business. So that's my mindset. Like I say all the time, Alec Hallaby is my top choice, but that doesn't matter. Yeah. But that's the kind of guy, the deputy to a top-tier GM. Now, some of these guys are a little different. Hallaby, very, very analytical, very, very database-driven kind of guy. So mixing with Shore would be interesting. But a guy like McKay might be more interesting if you're keeping that kind of 1-2 punch dynamic. But what I think is going to be interesting with Aikman, now he's obviously getting a couple of good dollars to do this consultancy role. He's not going to do it if it wasn't getting, good amount of money, I'm sure. But to tell you the truth, he's got nothing to lose. Who cares if you're Troy Aikman by saying something that might rub Stephen Ross the wrong way or might rub another person in the building? You're there to give your opinion, and he's getting paid probably pretty good money to give it. So my thing is, if I was a fly on the wall, when you're interviewing GM candidates and there's still a head coach, I mean, I hate saying this. I really, truly do. But what I do for a living is I get people jobs. I prep people on interviews. I set up meetings with executives for candidates. And I tell my candidates, like anybody that I would tell for a normal job interview, you have to ask questions. You have to find out what they are thinking to do with this person, you in that role. So if there's candidates that are asking, hey, can I hire my own head coach? And if the answer is a no, Troy Aikman might be the guy to be like, Mr. Ross, I think you're going to be making yourself into a difficult hole if you're telling these candidates at the interview, you guys can do what you want, but you're keeping the head coach. That's handcuffing a CFO saying you're inheriting a controller who's left us in the red the last 5 years. A general manager who has sales managers who haven't hit their quota. You're going to inherit these people. Someone does not want to hear that if they're serious about going into an organization and cleaning things up. They're going to have to bring in their own cleaning crew, so to speak. So 9 out of 10 of these general managers might be turning it down right off the bat if they know that they can't start from scratch and bringing in their head coach, that head coach's staff, and everything else trickling down. So Aikman might be the guy to say during the interview process, all right, guys, you got to change up what your expectations are. And I think you have to let this person go. Or it could be the opposite. But that's what Aikman's role is going to be, is an advisor and saying what he thinks this process is going to be like.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's what does Troy Aikman know? What were the conversations like? You know, you would think, does he have a feel one way or the other if they're going to keep McDaniel or not? We don't know those questions. But again, this is what gives me hope. I know we use the word hopium about it, is it's a fresh, unbiased opinion from the outside looking in, telling you, hey, you know, if you keep Mike, here's the candidate list. We bring in a guy. Let's say we bring in a John McKay, and we love him. But he's like, I'm bringing my own guy in Chris Shula, right? And Ross loves McDaniel. He's on the fence. You said it best. Maybe Aikman is the one that pushes him over the fence, where if it was Garfinkel or Shore, we're more used to these guys in the building, might not do that. So I think that's an excellent point. I think this is what we don't know what Troy knows. And I know they said, oh, he has nothing to do with the coaching thing, but they go hand in hand, right, Jason? Like, if Ross is truly committed to the fans, the franchise, and they're truly committed to this process of doing it right, I've said all along, Mike McDaniel won't be back. If he is, I promise you this, you are not getting the top 2 or 3 candidates at all on your list, at all. And that's why, if he is serious, I think the change should be made on Sunday or Black Monday. Get rid of McDaniel. I'm curious, Jason, what Troy knows. Like, there's a piece we're missing here, right? Like, that's the piece we're missing.
What Troy knows is 32 teams worth of knowledge, or 31
Absolutely.
teams outside of the Miami Dolphins. So whether it's directly from his own interviewing or broadcast preparation, I mean, which is extensive. I mean, you see Troy on Monday night, but the preparation starts Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
They sit down and interview these guys. People don't realize that. They sit down before the broadcast. Mm-hmm. They go to practices. They build a relationship with these guys. They interview. Troy not only knows how to win, right? Again, we don't know. Doesn't necessarily mean because you were a great player means you're good at evaluating players or GM candidates. But to me, his broadcast knowledge over the last how many years it's been, he sits down in rooms and asks tough questions with these guys. Like we said, Jason, that's the biggest thing.
Another thing that Troy could do is go into his Rolodex, and let's go with a fun little boom, 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 boom here.
Let's do it.
So let's say Troy's at home after a long day of consulting, picks up the phone and says, hey, coach. And by coach, I mean Jimmy Johnson, who is also in the broadcasting world and wants to have a drink and talk to a former coach and be like, what do you think? Here's the gal that I just interviewed. Here's my situation. What do you think, coach? Now, I know people are going to listen to me and be like, well, Jimmy Johnson wanted to get Dan Marino out when he was I get all that, but you have another mind. Of course.
Yeah.
But Troy Aikman has his own mind, which is pretty solid. And then he has the connections to his colleagues, which he could pick the brain of theirs on his spare time, whatever. And I think people will give him that opinion. So I think it's a very good win before the game even starts, bringing in a guy like Aikman. And I listen, why stop there? If Ross wants to bring in yet another consultant to get another cook in the kitchen, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to have a ring of advisors, so to speak. Now, I know Marino is part of this. Marino is much more of an ambassador to the brand. You know what I mean? Like, remember, in 2004, I want to say, he was hired for a hot minute as the general manager. Then probably sat down at the desk and be like, oh, boy.
He probably wasn't wrong. It was probably a good decision.
Listen, I was not mad with Marino.
Yeah, I know. I'm saying
turning around. It wasn't for him, but he will be.
They're too close. They're too close to the situation. That's what's good about Troy.
he'll have his input. And Troy Aikman, like I said, he could say, do, handle this role however he wants with no repercussions on having to lie in the bed that he made. He's helping out. And then when the consultancy is done, he'll take his money and he'll go back into his regular full-time gig. And that's that. So I think for Troy, why not take it? This is a phenomenal move for Troy. He's the biggest winner out of all this because he's getting paid to give his thoughts. And I'm sure, I don't know what the dollars and cents are. No one really does, but I am sure.
Pretty good.
Pretty
good.
No,
Steve. And he wipes his hands, a temporary role. Good. Thank you. Thank you for the check. I did the best I could, and he could care less what happens after that. You know what I mean? By the way, this is not an unprecedented approach. The Commanders did it with Bob Myers, the former GM of the Warriors, in 24. And I know they had a rough year, but they got Adam Peters to GM. They drafted Jalen Daniels. They've had injuries, but it seems to me that it's probably working out there. But they've had a down year. But it's not unprecedented. Teams do this, and it's more for we're too close to the situation. Marino's again going to be a part of this, but I thought the two. We'll wrap it up here pretty soon. Here, I know we didn't want to go too long, but I thought the two things that stood out: the Brandon Shore's role is very significant, and the emphasis on scouting. And to me, that's encouraging. You know me, I'm a big fan of that. I've said at its core, this is still, Jason, a talent acquisition business, and strong player evaluations has to be the foundation of everything you do. And that philosophy shift needs to be put to the forefront and change, and a welcome one. And of course, what it means for McDaniel. Like I said earlier, if they're really serious about this process, in my view, it makes him less likely to come back. But that said, this is Stephen Ross we're talking about. He has affinity to Mike, and he's going to be the one that makes the decision. So you just never know. Either way, only time will tell. But I agree with you, Jason. This is a positive, and we're going to have much more on this tomorrow. We're on Countdown to Game Day. But I want to leave with this. There are several GM candidates. I tweeted this out, and we're going to have a big episode on this next week, right, Jason? Of all the candidates, we're going to go through them one by one. But there are several GM candidates with extensive backgrounds. I think we can filter out some of these candidates now that deserve it. We mentioned John McKay and the connection with Bruce Shula. He deserves some attention. John Eric Sullivan, the Green Bay Packers vice president, big scouting background. Look what they have done in the draft. Andy Waddell from the Steelers, assistant GM, another big heavy scouting background. Ed Dodds from the Colts, they've had a good year, another one. And the Ravens vice president of player personnel, George Kanakis, he's another guy with a big personnel.
You want to bring in a wild card? There's your Louis Riddick.
Louis Riddick. I'm not a huge fan of Riddick, but I've heard it. I think we can do better. I know
leave all doors open.
Yeah. But again, I'm going to be focusing on heavy scouting. On your guy Hallaby, I don't know if that takes him out of the running or into the running. Maybe he's just a really good candidate that changes things, and you kind of you take him on board because he's that bright.
The thing about Hallaby, and again, this might be a clash in people and responsibilities with Shore and Hallaby, but to me, the biggest sell on a guy like Hallaby. It's because, look, you ask many people out there who the best general manager is in the league, and you'd be hard-pressed to not say Howie Roseman.
Correct.
Howie Roseman would actually ask Alec Hallaby about things. He called him his safeguard. So when you have that kind of advisory guy who's a number two, giving information up the chain to what is called the best general manager out there, I think bringing his analytical mind, Harvard educated, mixed with Shore's financial prowess, the cap knowledge, and look at what the
breaking up there
Eagles have done from a scouting standpoint. Look at that standpoint. You know, Alec Hallaby has say, it's a very intriguing potential matchup.
Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, does the Brandon Shore thing affect some candidates? We talk about McDaniel's thing. How much is Brandon Shore? I would imagine a guy with a heavy scouting background know that very clear Brandon Shore's not on that side. He's on to help with the contracts and the financial structure. I imagine that'd be okay. But some guys might get nervous of the connection you have and the experience they have over him starting in the building. So maybe they don't want that voice or that person kind of who has more of an ear to Stephen Ross around him. That could affect him. We don't know. But that's our quick little we've gone 25 minutes reaction video. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll have more stuff, more GM candidate stuff this week coming up. Make sure you subscribe to the Fins Faithful Pod. We got you covered all season, the off season, with Dolphins coverage of free agency, trades, the draft. We are locked in all season and beyond. Until next time, guys, I hope you enjoyed this quick reaction video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, show some love. We appreciate it. As always, guys, stay Fins Faithful. Have a safe weekend. We'll see you in the weekend. And hopefully when the Dolphins win the last season, but we'll have a lot more coverage ahead. As always, guys, stay Fins Faithful. We're out. Till next time.